Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, returning guest. If you've listened to my show, I've talked to him in the past. His name is David Livingstone. And I just reposted some of our earlier interviews, so you can check those out in my catalog. One is one we did on esoteric Nazism, which is a tie into the Order of Nine Angles. Believe it or not, it's in the news. This guy, Nikita Kassab, who tried to kill Trump, was tinkering around with this dark ideology. So that's an important episode. People check that out. I also just reposted today, May 9th, 2025, an older one we did in 2022, Terrorism and the Illuminati, a 3,000-year history. So check that out. But we've also done shows on really what I would call a magnum opus, a 6-part kind of study book on Western history, esotericism, maybe not really condone major media history, but real history. It's called ordoabchao. It's actually, a lot of it's free online, so you can also get 6 of the books. And he's very active on Patreon. We were talking about the Patreon in the pre-show, so I'll put a link to his Patreon, which you can check out. But if you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, and X, you'll see the covers. Well, here's the covers of ordoabchao. One of them is called The Third Temple. That's kind of caught my eye with all this kind of chaos. It kind of ties into the title, in my mind, to what's going on in the Middle East, which is just really savage, like really crazy stuff. But here you'll see the cover of Terrorism and the Illuminati. Another of his books is Transhumanism, The History of a Dangerous Idea, Black Terror, White Soldiers, Islam, Fascism, and the New Age. And then he has a recent book, which probably get me in trouble, but I think these are important topics that we need to discuss and filter out because they're affecting our lives. I was talking with Dave in the pre-show. You got to have loyalty oaths here in certain states in the U.S., which are really unconstitutional. You really have to kind of pick sides, I guess, in this whole conflict and the genocide in the Middle East. Netanyahu's not very comfortable, popular in his own country, guys. I mean, it's not like I'm after Israel or the state of Israel. Some of these characters are very unsavory. Title of his new book is Zionism, A History of Jewish Heresy. So we can talk about that. But tied into this whole, we were talking the pre-show, like something that I also see is like people going to what's called the Kotel or the Wailing Wall. He has a picture of Trump there, and I think it's a yarmulke in that little hat, making a prayer, or I don't even know if Trump prays or what his story is, but it seems like that's a go-to thing for everybody in the Western world, is just kind of loyalty oath to Israel and this third temple and everything that's going on there. But David Livingstone can talk more about that. So David, welcome back to the show. It's been too long.
Thank you. Great to be back.
For people who aren't familiar with their work, I was talking to people online once they knew they were having you on there, showing me all their books in their library. They have all your books in their library and stuff like that. So this will be an additional thing for people to go check out his books. But maybe you can do kind of a long arc of your writing up to the present, and then we can just start from there.
Okay. So, I've been researching for about 35, writing for 30. My first book, The Dying God, was published in 2002. That's pretty much where it started. It really laid the foundation for all my subsequent books because it explored the origins of the occult. There's it's hard to get at the truth of the occult because, excuse me, good thing you recommended me get a glass of water.
I always do. People start talking, then 20 minutes in, they're like, I wish I had a glass of water.
Makes sense. So you have mainstream historians that avoid the topic. So there's not a lot of qualified study of the subject, except for most of the studies that are done by believers or occultists themselves. So I knew that there was an answer somewhere in the middle. So I really tried to do an academic study of the occult, but one that wasn't biased, as academia tends to be, when I tried to get at the facts, and because there's hints that are available by occult authors, but of course, they're mostly fantasy. So it's a matter of pulling the various clues and trying to reconstruct a more accurate history. A lot of my book was dependent on a Belgian scholar, His name is Frans Cumont. He partnered with a guy named Joseph Bidez. And so Franz Kumo was considered the founder of the study of Mithraism, the academic study of Mithraism. Lived in the latter part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. The guy is exceptional. I've never seen a scholar like him since. He has a caliber of scholarship which we don't see these days. The problem with most scholars is that they tend to be fixated on a particular avenue of history. So they'll study Greek history or they'll study only Egyptian history. This is a guy who knew the history of the entirety of the ancient Middle East, what could function in the languages, the ancient languages. So he was able to pull at influences and tendencies that most scholars missed. And that's essential because it's part of the world that is treated as being separate from the West, when in fact it's really the actual birthplace of the West, and was very fertile in its production of cultural traditions that eventually influenced the West. So I traced the origins of what's known as the Kabbalah, which really begins in the 12th century southern France in Europe. But in reality, it's based, according to Gershom Scholem, it's based on older traditions that date back to what he called Jewish Gnosticism, which emerged in the first centuries AD and can be traced further back to groups like the Essenes. So I trace it back all the way to 6th century BC, when it resulted in a cult of Zoroastrianism, but not Zoroastrianism proper, a heretical version of Zoroastrianism. And this is why Kumo was so important, because that's what he was able to identify. This cult then spread to Egypt and Greece. Greece had produced, it influenced Pythagoras and Plato, and that gave birth to the traditions of both Pythagoreanism and Platonism. And then in Egypt, it produced Hermeticism. So in ancient Alexandria, you get this confluence of these various influences that produced what are called the ancient mysteries, and that's really the birth of the Western esoteric tradition. So jump ahead a few centuries, that tradition was inherited in certain Muslim mystical sects. They then introduced the Templars to those teachings. Those teachings then were incorporated to the West, resulting in things like the Legends of the Holy Grail, the Cathars, the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Illuminati. So that's what I come to our first book, and then so from there it was a matter of taking that basis and then exploring where it reached further. So I didn't realize at the time when I was reading that book of all the various channels that it influenced, and so that's why my second book, Terrorism Illuminati, is that Islamic mystical tradition survived over the centuries and basically sort of reconnected again, maybe artificially, by more modern Islamic mystics who produced a number of movements. Most important one was the Salafi movement, which has the backing of Saudi Arabia today, which is where you get groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda. So, behind the scenes, they present themselves outwardly as Orthodox Sunni Muslims, but in reality, they're descendants of these ancient Islamic mystical traditions, particularly the Ismailis. And that's why they teamed up with the Nazis, because the Nazis represent the same. In fact, I identified one guy in particular. His name is Jamaluddin al-Afghani. This guy is, my recent research as well, so I'm working on another book, and my recent research is focused back on him again, because I'll try to be brief, but he was one of the ascended masters for Elena Blavatsky.
Wow.
He
was a pan-Arabist too, right? Wasn't he? He's still considered a big-time Arab scholar.
I've never seen a person who's had the extent of influence. So yeah, if you want to, because that's what I was able to do recently, was go back to I never had the time to explore his Middle Eastern influence, because in the Middle East, it's his grouping of conspirators that were responsible for the Iranian Enlightenment, which so he was actually a Baha'i. So he was pretending to be a Sunni, but he was actually a Baha'i. He's not even a Shia, because he came from Iran, which would make him a Shia. So he was part of the Baha'i movement and spearheading that agenda in league with the Aga Khan. And so they produced it's his cohort founded the first Islamic lodge in Iran, which was behind the Iranian, in what's called Iranian Enlightenment, which and then one of his disciples assassinated the Shah Nasruddin in 1896. I can't remember exactly what year, which opened the way for what they call the Persian Constitutional Revolution, which created modern Iran. And that's just in Iran. Then there's this whole influence in Ottoman Turkey. So that's where in Ottoman Turkey, this is where he produced the Pan-Islamic movement. He was also behind the Young Turk movement, which was a secret crypto-Jewish movement dating back to Shabtai Zvi, what are called Dumnies, which can bring us back to our subject of Zionism. And he also, and so his disciples, principally Muhammad Abdu, but especially Rashid Rida, was the guy who promoted the cause of Pan-Arabism, which was really the most modern manifestation of his influence. So that started with what's called the Arab Revolt, which is where Sharif Hussein used the cause of Pan-Arabism, sponsored by the British and the British/Zionists, to overthrow the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. And then this is how they created this patchwork of modern states like Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and so on. Saudi Arabia is another story. And
which are slowly falling before our eyes, these artificial barriers. Actually, they're
Totally.
probably not artificial. They're real, but they're intended to balkanize the Middle East.
Yeah. That's why I tell Muslims are surprised that none of these states are doing anything about, the travesty that's happening in Gaza. But it's like, well, these are states that were created by traitors who consciously betrayed the Islamic community by teaming up with the British to gain, some kind of like a pretense of power. They've been vassals ever since. So of course they're not acting.
Right, they're intended to make sure that there's going to be internal division, Christians against Muslims, against different ethnicities, and all that stuff.
Exactly.
On the rock.
So my recent book, my latest book. So I did Ordo-abchao. Ordo-abchao is a 6-volume set, which really goes back. I couldn't believe how much I was able to further explore, further discover. It sort of, leaps off of what I started with my previous books, but really, so I go back a lot to the earlier history, especially like the Middle Ages, the creation of the Holy Grail and all that stuff, to see how much, especially all the families that were involved over the centuries that were preserving these traditions. And you can see all the connections and the families, modern families that they produced that continue to advance.
And like the Baphomet too came out of the Middle East too, right, through the Templars and all that too, right?
Yeah.
This old magical concept.
Yeah, exactly. So
so it's a long history, like 3,000 years. It's really a long history of all these like esoteric traditions coming out of Mesopotamia or something, and then seeding all the way, different permutations, different families, all the way to the present, really. And so a lot of these, what people may not understand is a lot of these people are fronts, like they're Catholics on the surface, but and that was the Illuminati idea, right? Is to kind of infiltrate Masonry and things like that too.
Yeah, and the Ismailis as well too, right? The Ismailis basically, the Ismailis is where it all originates. They're the ones who originally effectively founded the conspiracy, and that this is what they introduced the Templars to. And so they were not a Muslim. They were, I don't know what you'd characterize them, because they had 9 degrees of initiation, and then with each degree of initiation, you would be told that what you had learned previously was abrogated, and the truth was something else. So they would pass them through a stage of where they would leave Islam and go into Zoroastrianism to a point where it was like a nihilistic cult.
Wow. That's amazing.
So and this was interesting about, if you look at what Jamal Afghani said. So Jamal Afghani, like I said, he was actually a Baha'i, but also influenced by the Ismailis. He said he taught his disciples that, if I can sort of paraphrase what he says, you can't fight religion except with the sword of religion. He basically said that's why if you look at us, we do everything that is normally expected from a believer: fast, pray, right? Go to congregation, recite scripture, study scripture, maybe even become an expert in scripture. but in reality, the entire intent is to undermine the whole thing.
Wow, it's amazing. So
Because
this
one thing I realized recently, because the thing is, when my books, I consider it circumstantial evidence, right? We don't have a confession. We likely will never get one. So it's a whole lot of circumstantial evidence which points to what seems to be something which is pretty organized over the centuries. And I've been trying to figure it out how, what's the principal organization behind it that would connect them all. And what I kind of realize, and I'm not sure to what extent it answers it, but we've seen Judaism as an example, right? Judaism, Islam, Christianity. These are all traditions, religious traditions that have been preserved from generation to generation for thousands of years. So it's not impossible for a satanic tradition to have been similarly preserved from generation to generation over the years. So it seems to be like an anti-religious tradition that has been. It's just that it's kept secret. So it's hard for me. It's hard to fathom that it could be preserved like that over the years. But how else do you explain the continuity, right? Because it's a core set of beliefs that you can trace back to Babylon. Yeah. They're consistent. You can list what the doctrines are, and they're preserved from figure to figure, right? From Plato to Plotinus to Hermeticism to Renaissance to the Templars, the Ismailis. It stays consistent throughout that time. And how else do you explain that kind of preservation? Of course, to our time.
Right. It's you finished the sentence in my mind. I was thinking Babylon. I've had the either good fortune or misfortune to read a lot of occultists' work, and they all go back to Mesopotamia. That's where the most important grimoires and everything goes back to Babylon or Assyria or something.
Albert Pike says it himself. He begins the Mores and Dogma to explain that it's all because. So if we want to come back to this subject, that's the whole point, right? Is that for a long time, I kind of had this suspicion that what they were trying to do is fulfill the Book of Revelation, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that Albert Pike just states openly. Because I read his book a while back, but I just never caught on to that's what he was saying. So that's why St. John, right, the author of Revelation, is the patron saint of Freemasonry. And what Albert Pike explains is that the Revelation is a Kabbalistic book, and it's effectively the blueprint. So what Freemasonry is effectively trying to do is fulfill the Book of Revelation. Wow. And so that's what we're experiencing in our time. Is this
ties right in with Crowley too? The same stuff. Crowley's all Book of Revelation, Beast, Scarlet Woman, Mark of the Beast, the whole bit.
Third Temple, most important, right? Because that's why Masons are called Masons, because allegorically they're laying the bricks for the construction of the Third Temple.
It's incredible. So all this stuff, and even Obama, people missed one of his speeches that he gave. But he made some allusion to Masonic ideas. He said it's the spirit that holds these bricks together. Like a Mason would just be ding, but the average what do they call them? The profane would just he's talking about putting, making a building or something. No, he's referencing all this masonry. Right. So it's Tubal Cain and was it the three Masons? Isn't that the initiation ritual?
Yeah, the three, the murderers of Hiram.
Hiram, that's right. Yeah. So. And it's also all this past is coming to a confluence at the Third Temple, and it's just all eyes are on Israel and the world. What's so scary in it, I think it ties into what you're saying earlier, is that it makes me also think of this statement of Putin said is all the people who started the special operation or whatever happened in 2022. February, he said nobody's seen these people in a church or a synagogue. He's probably has some of the best intel in the world. But I think he's making some profound statement. These aren't people on the surface like the real Jews or the real Christians or the real Muslims. This is something different that ties, I think, into your research.
That's why I called the subtitle of my book is The History of a Jewish Heresy.
Maybe you can give an overview of that book. I think it's important.
Yeah, sure. So, this might start to sound remote, but I'm going to try to give the briefest summary, but this really gets at the core to show you really where it starts. So, Herzl opened, I think it was the Second Zionist Congress, with the theme from Wagner's Tannhäuser opera. And, it's interesting how many clues that are dropped into this. There's a very famous speech at the end of the movie Blade Runner. I don't know if you heard, right?
He was at the Tannhäuser Gate. Yeah, before he said,
right?
Yeah.
So that's the question is why, right? So how does the founder of the Zionist state, which is intended to resolve the Jewish question, resolve the centuries-long challenge of anti-Semitism, play the opening of an opera by a composer who is the godfather of modern anti-Semitism?
Right. It's Wagner, right?
Pardon?
It's done by Wagner, right?
Wagner, exactly. Right. So what's interesting about Wagner is that he was born in the Jewish neighborhood of Leipzig, right? He found out that his father was Jewish. And then when you look at his circle of friends, they were all Frankists, almost for the most part, right? The guy who helped him, right? So one of his first I'm not an expert on Wagner's biography, but a very important opera, the one that most influenced Hitler, was Rienzi.
Right.
Right.
He identified with this guy who was a hero, but wasn't highborn, right?
Something like that.
Something like that, if I remember. Yeah.
So the person who helped him with that was a composer. His name was Giacomo Meyerbeer. And Giacomo Meyerbeer, his father, I can't remember his first name. His father was last name Meyer, who was one of the founders of what's called the Hamburg Temple. And the Hamburg Temple is really where it all begins. So let me backtrack now. So Tannhäuser is important because it's a reference to what's called the Singerkrieg, the song contest. It's a contest that takes place between three Minnesingers. Among them is Wolfram von Eschenbach, who is the guy who wrote the Lohengrin, which is the original tale of the Night Swan. Right? So the Night Swan was, according to the medieval legends, was the father of Godfrey of Bouillon and his three brothers. Godfrey of Bouillon, who was the leader of the First Crusade. Right? There's the legend is that before he headed off on the First Crusade, Godfrey went and got some advice from Rashi. Rashi is the most famous medieval Jewish scholar of medieval times. Okay, he's even considered the founder of Zionism because he's the first one to have proposed that Jews were entitled to inherit the land of Israel. So Rashi was based out of the city of Troyes in France, which was governed by Hugh of Champagne, and he was in close contact with Hugh of Champagne, and Hugh of Champagne was one of the founders of the Templars.
Right. This Godfrey Bouillon was a founder of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, which, like, some of these guys on, like, the right here are members of this. Like the Fulner, who started the Heritage Foundation, is part of this 1,000-year history. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. And so there's, they know this stuff. Maybe not. There's certain they have. Maybe I'm not sure to what extent, but they have a general idea. But this is consciously the religion that they've adopted,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And this is why it's the mission that they're contributing to. So so what happens now is that this is why what's important is that after the Crusaders conquered Jerusalem, they established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and so this is why from that point forward, all these families continue to inherit the title of King of Jerusalem, even though they lost the title. So even somebody as recent as Otto von Habsburg, who is a very core character involved, I don't know if we have time to get into him, but claimed also the title of King of Jerusalem. I think Juan Carlos of Spain also claims.
Right, they're overlapping with all this Knights of the Malta, all these things, these Knights of Jerusalem and all this stuff. Yeah.
So the Knight of the Swan. So so this is why these various families all claim descent, because the Knight of the Swan is a demonic entity. That's the point, right? it's kind of like whitewashed a little bit by giving him, this story of being descended from this one mysterious figure that's pulled on a boat pulled by swans, right? But reality is that he has unknown oranges. It's basically to disguise the fact, which I believe is understood, that he is a demonic origin. And so that's why these families then claim descent back to the Order of the Swan. And so the person who sponsored the singing contest, the minne contest, was Herman. It was Landgrave of Thuringia. And his son married Elizabeth of Hungary. Elizabeth of Hungary is famous because she performed the miracle of the roses, which is interesting because he thought, I can't remember what the story was, but at some point she lifts her skirt and all these roses come out. So the rose is a Ionic symbol, right? It's five-petaled, corresponding to the pentacle.
Lingam and yoni and all that stuff, right? Yeah.
Right. So it's also, and this is why it's important that the Zohar, it's a massive book. It begins by stating that, because one of the most important books in Jewish mysticism is the Song of Songs, or it's called the Song of Solomon, right? It's a dialogue between the lover and the beloved. And it's understood to be mystically to represent a dialogue between God and the Shekinah. And the Shekinah is supposed to be the sort of female aspect of God. The Shekinah is also, according to Zohar, equivalent of Lilith, which is a black goddess, or basically, a black not in like color, physical color, but black in terms, spiritually black in terms of like a goddess of evil, right?
Like a witch or something. Yeah.
And so, so Elizabeth of Hungary now becomes the ancestress, recognized ancestress, and we don't have time to go into all the connections that she has, basically, of all her descendants who become founders of the Order of the Dragon, founders of the Order of St. George, founders of the Order of Christ, which is because the Templars were suppressed, but there's one place where they were not suppressed, and that was Portugal, and they just sort of renamed themselves as of several orders. One of them was the Order of Santiago, the other were Montesa, and the other one was the Order of Christ, which was founded by Denis I of Portugal, who was married to another Elizabeth, who also performed a miracle of the roses, who was a descendant of the original Elizabeth of Hungary.
So these are all overlapping occulted things. So the Templars really were occulted.
I think so.
Yeah.
So now the Landgraves of Hesse trace their descent, like openly. They trace their descent to Elizabeth of Hungary. And so Philip the First Landgrave of Hesse, the first Landgrave of Hesse, he was part of a network of Protestant rebels who supported the cause of Martin Luther. His primary collaborator, I can't remember exactly what his name was the one who designed the seal, Martin Luther's rose seal, right? The five-petaled rose of Luther. And Philip the First's descendants and descendants of all this whole network were now the founders of the Rosicrucian movement, which was based on the marriage of Frederick V of the Palatinate with Elizabeth Stuart, who was the daughter of King James. And Johann Valentin Andrea wrote a book about it called the chemical wedding, which means the alchemical wedding.
Right. It means chemical means alchemical.
Right.
Alchemy.
And,
right. Yeah.
Right. And so it goes back to the idea of sacred marriage. Right. That's what sacred marriage is all part of, not only the ancient mysteries, but evolved into symbolic in alchemy. And so this marriage was supposed to have some particular significance. Frederick V's main backer, so the Rosicrucian movement was basically born in the area of Hesse, supported by Maurice of Hessen-Kassel, who was a descendant of Philip I. So now what happens is that the Rosicrucian movement, after it was initially founded, gains the support of what's called a group called the Hartlib Circle. It's a group that surrounded a guy named Samuel Hartlib, and included leaders of it were John Dury and Comenius. And because what's important is that the Rosicrucian movement was timed with what's called the Grand Conjunction. A Grand Conjunction is when Jupiter and Saturn align in the sky. It happens every 20 years, and then there's it has several degrees of significance. So there's every 20 years, every 200 years, every 400 years, and every 2,000 years. And so it was believed to be a herald of the coming of the Messiah. And that's why they believe that when the Magi, because we talked about, we just said everybody traces it back to Babylon, everybody traces it back to the Magi. Albert Pike traces the history of Kabbalah back to the Magi. Gotcha. So apparently the Magi, when they saw the star of the Messiah, that was a great conjunction that they were witnessing. So it has huge Kabbalistic significance. And one person who was important for elaborating the significance of it was Isaac Abarbanel. And Isaac Abarbanel was another very famous Kabbalist. He was one of the sponsors. So first of all, I can't remember what role he had in expulsion of the Jews from Spain. I think this whole Marrano community, when it was expelled from Spain, he was the one who led them out of Spain. But he was also the one who sponsored Columbus's voyages to North America the day after
right. It's like the same year, 1492 or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's I think it's pretty much an established fact now that Columbus is Jewish. I mean, there was lots of speculation, but I can't remember. There's some recent finding that happened recently, and it's pretty much confirmed. So, because part of the prophecy is that the Messiah can't arrive until the Jews are spread across the world, and so that's why Isaac Abarbanel's descendant, I think his great granddaughter or something like that, married Manasseh ben Israel. And Manasseh ben Israel was the guy who really connected this entire circle of Rosicrucians. And according to their calculations, the Rosicrucian movement, like I said, the Rosicrucian movement timed themselves to announce themselves to the world in 1623, to time with the Great Conjunction. And then their next important date that they calculated was 1666. So what you find is that there's now this connection between Manasseh ben Israel, the Hartlib Circle, and the network that were involved in promoting and generating excitement about the so-called Messianic vision of Shabbatai Zvi, who declared himself Messiah in 1666. Right? Did so by overturning the Torah. Right? He basically taught the idea that the Torah was only applicable for the time before the Messiah. Now that he had arrived, everything was permitted. And so, in fact, it was recommended to deliberately overthrow, to contravene all the laws of the Torah. This is why it's not me who says it, as Gershom Shalom says, one of the main issues was incest. This is why a lot of, their rituals involved orgies with white swapping and incest and things like that. They had a famous ritual called the turning out of the lights. So you've got two branches, right? There's one branch that followed Shabbatai Zvi's conversion to Islam, and they became the Donmei sect. And then the movement also spread throughout Europe, particularly in Poland and Moravia, which is now like a Czech Republic. And now the group known as Hartlib Circle, who were part of this network, they had one guy in particular who was really connecting all of them. His name was Peter Sirarius, who was the guy who was chiefly responsible for spreading the news of Shabbatai Zvi's mission. And apparently he even convinced Henry Oldenburg, who was the founder of the Royal Society. The Royal Society the Hartlib Circle was known as the Invisible College, and the Invisible College basically just transformed itself into the Royal Society. And the Royal Society were responsible for the creation of Freemasonry. So what happens is that Manasseh ben Israel, he's responsible for negotiating with Cromwell to have the Jews allowed to return back to England. They had been forbidden entry into England since 1290. They were expelled by Edward I. And so now Manasseh ben Israel's followers come to England, and they establish the first synagogue. It's first called Cree Church Lane Synagogue, but then it becomes renamed as the Bevis Marks synagogue, and that becomes the first synagogue in England. And so this is why now you get this network of of the Royal Society, Sabbatians, because it's the Bevis Mark Synagogue was usually led by Sabbatian rabbis, and then you have the and then which this group and Quakers, interestingly enough, and then this group together produces the Freemasonry. So Bevis Marks now has three important sister synagogues in the United States. There's Shearith Israel in New York. There's Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia, which was founded with financial support from Benjamin Franklin. It also had another founding member was Chaim Solomon, who was a Rothschild agent, played a key role in the Sons of Liberty. There was a Turo synagogue in Newport, and last but not least, Beth Elohim in Charleston. So what happens is that there's I can't remember what their name is. They call them the seven founders. So when you look at the seven founders of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, we're all congregants of Beth Elohim Synagogue. And what they did is they had a relationship now with the Hamburg Temple that I mentioned earlier, whose Wagner's friends were connected to. So there's the person who was considered. So there's most important. This is the book that introduced me to the Sabbatian movement. It's a book by Rabbi Marvin Enthelman. It's a two-part book called "To Eliminate the Opiate," and this really helped me to answer the puzzle of how this sort of Jewish involvement works. That he identified that it's a heretical movement within Judaism, which was responsible for it. And so he found a list of ordination in I can't remember, some library in New York. I think it's a Schiff collection, in fact. And this is the list was preserved by Friedrich Nicolai. Friedrich Nicolai is the publisher of the Illuminati.
Wow.
And so this list identified a list of various successors. I listed successors of Shabtai Zvi. Several of them were rabbis of Bevis Marks in London. And then the last one on the list at that time, because that's when I believe the list was stopped being recorded, was Moses Mendelssohn. Moses Mendelssohn is basically the father of modern Judaism. So the kind of Judaism you see in the manifesting itself in the world today is largely attributable to him.
Mendelssohn, right?
He's considered the godfather of what's called Haskalah, which is the Jewish. So you have the French Enlightenment, he had the Jewish Enlightenment. And what he called for Jews to leave the ghetto, because before this time, Jews were living in ghettos. It kind of has a stigma attached to it, but in some cases it was by preference because it allowed them to live according to their own traditions. They might be separated. They had some discriminations against them, which maybe were not so desirable. But again, they were able to practice Judaism and govern their lives according to Jewish traditions in these communities. What Moses Mendelssohn recommended was for them to leave the ghetto and basically become assimilated. Right? And now he's friends and becomes the center of an entire network of leading figures in the Illuminati. So his best friend was Friedrich Nicolai. Another his best friend was Theodore Lessing. Lessing wrote a famous play called Nathan the Wise, which is believed to be based on both Moses Mendelssohn and Nathan of Gaza, who was sort of the John the Baptist of Shabtai Zvi.
Gotcha. Wow.
And also his entire network, his friends included Gottfried Herder, Friedrich Schiller, all the philosophers who were part of the German birth of the German Romantic movement, which particularly what's called Weimar Classicism. And Weimar Classicism was born in the region of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, which was ruled by Karl August of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, who was a member of the Illuminati, but also claimed descent from the Knight of the Swan. Right? So this is where now this confluence comes back now. And So Karl August was the sponsor. I guess I said this already. He was the sponsor of Weimar classicism. Now, the daughter of Moses Mendelssohn was Dorothea Mendelssohn. She married Friedrich Schlegel. Friedrich Schlegel was the first to coin the term Aryan.
Wow.
Right? So there's two important traditions that gave birth to the German nationalist movement, which evolved into the Nazis. Nazis were nothing; they were the new kid on the block. It took a century and a half to evolve into what they became. So, and it starts with actually three people. It starts with Friedrich Schlegel, who coined the term Aryan, popularized the whole concept of an Aryan race, and Herder, who basically developed the idea of a folk. The folk was this whole idea that the significance of any nation is found in its language, and so he identified the idea of a folk as being really the driving source of the identity of any nation. And then you had Fichte, and Fichte was he was basically part of the same network too. He wasn't as closely connected to Mendelssohn as Herder was, but he's still part of this network. And so they're all members of the Illuminati. So Schlegel as well was a member of the Illuminati, exactly. And so so basically what you have out of this network of people, it's all a network. Oh yeah, this is where I should go back to. So now Moses Mendelssohn's followers joined the Asiatic Brethren. They became the founding members of the Asiatic Brethren. The Asiatic Brethren were founded by Moses Dobruschka, who was the nephew or cousin of Jacob Frank, who was the successor of Shabbatai Zevi. So he basically founded the most important revival of the Sabbatian movement in the mid 1700s. And then,
right. So when people say Jews or Torah, and a lot of these people are getting bar mitzvah or something, there's a strain within Judaism that isn't true to the Old Testament as we know it.
It's a heresy, right? That's why Judaism has a legitimate Orthodox tradition, and this is part of the play that is being fomented these days, is like this deliberate manufacturing of anti-Semitism, and a lot of it focuses on what apparently some very problematic passages in the Talmud, right? So
Jesus is burning in excrement, and we're above God, and all that stuff. Yeah.
But these Frankists reject the Talmud in favor of the Zohar. So it's
and I think that one of these guys who's like thinking about running for president, they paid the guy out of Chicago, the family, the Jewish family, who has trannies in their family. They're like, they paid for this beautiful version of the Zohar.
Right.
That's their religion, the Pritzkers. So if you look at this guy Pritzker, he's talking about presidential aspirations. He's not loyal to the Torah, to the Old Testament. That's what a lot of people don't get. They have to parse through the Judaism. Like, what kind of Judaism? Like,
that's it.
You're criticizing Christianity. What kind of Christianity? What kind of Islam? What do you really mean?
That's it. The problem is that what they do is they foster a culture of debate, right? That you get all kinds of amateurs who are debating each other. They convince themselves that they somehow have a handle on these subjects, and they're qualified to debate on these topics. And
they're not getting to this.
People shouldn't be involved in this debate, but there's a procedure that you should go through. You should first identify. It doesn't mean that experts, you take their word for it, but you start there, and you develop conversations. And that's what they do is basically that's why there's just so much acrimony, particularly in the United States, and it's fostered. That's ordoabchao, right? That's the chaos that they're creating to produce their version of order.
Right. Their order. Right.
Yeah.
It's incredible. These are really these terms. This is what Jordan Peterson, a guy who worked for the UN at one point, literally wrote a book like Order Out of Chaos, like total Masonic terms.
Totally.
Yeah. And
oh yeah.
Holy smokes. I mean, that's a whole nother show, is how the UN got started and all that other stuff. And all these characters, there's a lot of guys with ties to the UN. Weinstein,
right.
Jordan Peterson comes to mind. these guys are like our public intellectuals. And then the other guy is, I forgot this one world government dude. I forgot his name, but he's all around. But he has like literal UN ties.
Yeah.
I mean, Jewish guy too. Jewish guy. So like, what kind of Jew is this? It's like
That's
incredible.
it.
So
That's
the whole thing is Zionism. It goes back to my statement on Putin. Who are these people fomenting these wars? Who are the neocons? Who are these guys? These guys may not go to synagogue. And what kind of synagogue are they going to? It's like saying you're a Christian. Jim Jones was a Christian, guys. He claimed he was a Christian. Like he's probably the least Christian person imaginable. But
yeah, because that's the thing. That's what Zionism has done, is that they've created they created Jewishness into a race, and that's because it's necessary. Zionism is contradictory to Orthodox Judaism. There's what's called the three oaths, and one of the three oaths commands Jews that they're not allowed to try to recolonize Palestine.
Wow, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware.
So according to Orthodox Judaism, it's what everything the Zionists doing there now is like it's against Orthodox Judaism.
Which is why they won't fight, right? Isn't that a huge issue within Israel? There's a reason why they won't fight. And
it's also the reason why so the Zionists couldn't go to the Jewish people and say, "Oh, look at the Scripture commands us to colonize Palestine." They couldn't resort to Judaism, so they had to come up with something else. So they came up with anti-Semitism, and that's what's interesting now is that when you look at this history, anti-Semitism begins with the followers of Moses Mendelssohn.
Right, because they're not even really practicing. Right, it's incredible. This whole history is so important. Netanyahu, within the last year, mentioned the Dreyfus affair, which the founder of Zionism supposedly was a reporter for.
Yeah.
So this whole history is and his dad, his real name is Melikovsky. His dad wrote a book on Zionism, but I think it's this kind of political Zionism.
Yeah, you mean Netanyahu's dad?
Yeah,
Netanyahu's dad is Benzion Netanyahu.
Yes.
You know what's interesting? His dad wrote a book about Isaac Abarbanel that I just mentioned earlier. Yeah.
I think his book on Zionism has some of these figures you're talking about in it.
Yeah,
I can probably pull it out if I can find it. But it's real, like there's a funny thing, like a lot of these guys to be like more Jewish, they adopt, more Christian sounding, more Israeli sounding last names. Like they all have fake last names.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find Milozovsky's book, Maikovsky. We are at the 47-minute mark. I could probably talk to you for like 5 hours, but where can people find your recent work, your recent book? I mean, I think this issue of Zionism very timely. People have to understand it's much more nuanced and much more layered than some of the surface. And I think you're right. Some of these people would love to just make it about anti-Semitism and never get into the kind of battles within Judaism.
That's it. So you got my site on the screen. So ordoabchao.ca. That's now where I collect all my information. So all my books are there. My recent book, which is Zionism, published I got a year ago now. And I got a new one that's coming out as we speak. But this one's more specifically having to do, so like I said, I talked about the career of Jamal Afghani. So it really explores the undermining of the Islamic world. And I've also I used to do Facebook, but Facebook's the enemy, so I don't do that anymore. I do Patreon, which I much prefer. So on Patreon is basically where I share stuff on a regular basis and have interactions with my readers. So if anybody wants to join there, you're welcome to do so.
I can't find his dad's book. I got to bring that up. That's probably another show because I'd be interested what Benjamin Netanyahu's real or Benjamin Makovsky's real kind of outlook is. Because I don't think he wears the tefillin and he's in these religious things. But what's his real outlook? Like, I mean,
they're all followers of. So Netanyahu's dad was a secretary to Zev Jabotinsky.
Right, he was like a real nasty character, right? He
was what I cover in my book is, like I said,
the Irgun or something like that, right?
Right,
Malikowski or something.
Yeah. So there's twin tradition from Moses Mendelssohn. You get a twin tradition, right? Which basically, you get the one. So like I said, the members of the Asiatic Brethren founded the first Jewish Jewish Masonic lodge in Frankfurt. So it's called the Frankfurt Juden Lodge. And they were associated with the Hamburg Temple. And the Hamburg Temple is the one I told you has connections with the Beth Elohim in Charleston, where Scottish Rite Freemasonry was founded. But it's also that temple that gave birth to reform. So there's two modern traditions in Judaism that effectively led to Zionism: Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism. Before that, there was only Judaism. There was no there's other sects, but primarily there was just Orthodox Judaism. So through Moses Mendelssohn's influence, this is where you get this fork in the road, and then you have out of the Hamburg Temple. So all of Wagner's network of friends were all associated with the Hamburg Temple, and Wagner inspired the whole what is called the Pan-German movement, and that was spread through an organization called the Tugendbund, the League of Virtue. League of Virtue was named after a symbol as another society by exactly the same name, founded by Moses Mendelssohn. But it became really the birthplace of German nationalism, and it was spread through the university fraternity movement called the Burschenschaft in Austria and Germany, and that's why there was a simultaneous veneration in this fraternity movement of the music of Wagner and Nietzsche, and that's why Herzl, he got his first introduction to German nationalism when he belonged to the Albia fraternity of the University of Vienna. And that's a network that connects entire, it's a weird phase where you have all these proto-Zionists connected with Pan-German movement. Freud happened to be one of them. Alfred Adler, is it Alfred Adler? One of the Adler brothers.
One of the early psychotherapists.
Yeah. And you get they're all part of what's called the Pfeffer Storner. Anyway, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. Yeah, there's he is, Benzion Netanyahu. So
with Jabotinsky's in there, Herzl,
right,
and some of these other characters. Wow. Yeah.
So Jabotinsky is the one. So to make a long story short, you get this from Pan-Germanism and this network of Frankists, the influence of Wagner with Blavatsky, who was inspired by Afghani, and Saint Yves Dalvet, who was also inspired by Afghani. You get the formulation of the Nazi doctrine, right? And then, so simultaneously, out of the same source, also out of the Hamburg Temple, you get the Zionist movement. And so that's why, there's many Frankists who were involved in the Nazi movement. Most of them had to try to,
Aryanize themselves.
Proof about their Jewish origins. Goebbels was one of them. Goebbels was one of his girlfriends, his wife Magda had originally had a love affair with Aaron Arlosoroff, who was one of the founders of the Zionist movement. Arlosoroff is the one who orchestrated the Havara Agreement, the famous transfer agreement, right? That collaborated with the Nazis. Reinhard
Galen?
Heydrich was also a secret Frankist. And
that's wow. Heydrich? He's a nasty guy too. Wow.
Absolutely. And where was I coming back to?
He was assassinated, I think.
This is why the one group out of the Zionists. So Heydrich, there was many Jewish groups in Germany, Germany, and particularly Nazi Germany, and all of them were suppressed except the Zionist movement. And this is like a known policy of the Zionist government. The only group that was allowed to use their flag was the Nazi movement. Because
Heydrich was supposed to be the next guy, second in command, or second heir to Hitler, or after Hess, or something like that, like a top Nazi.
Yeah. So the Nazis collaborated. So the group that they primarily collaborated with was the Irgun, and the Irgun. They're fascinating if you look in the story of like the close collaboration between basically it was the fascist Zionist movement, and it was inspired by Jabotinsky. And what's unique about Jabotinsky is that he was far more radical than the other Zionists like Ben Gurion and Chaim Weizmann. And one of his key aspirations was the idea of a greater Israel. And that's why
and right. So then there's Mayakovsky to Netanyahu. And some of these other Jabotinskians, I think those brothers who are like in who was the head of the mayor of Chicago, and one of them runs something else. They are sons of a guy who worked for Jabotinsky.
Yeah.
So these are people all involved in American, I can't remember their last name.
That's it.
But American politics and industry.
Yeah. And that's why you see this continuing collaboration between the far right and Zionists. That's why you look worldwide. Most of the far right groups these days are pro-Israel. You look at Netanyahu and his network of friends, people like Viktor Orban. They've been, especially in the United States, this is why the right-wing movement in the United States was fostered basically by Israel.
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
To produce the election of Trump.
Right, the right-wing Israelis want Trump in, right?
Yeah, he's their man. It took a long time to get him in power, but they've done it.
He's still giving them money for the genocide in Gaza. So this past is present. There's absolutely no question about it.
It's a plot that goes all the way back to 1987, when Ronald Lauder, head of the World Jewish Congress, introduced Trump to the Russian ambassador. And it was a month after that Trump first announced his interest of running for president. All orchestrated by Roy Cohn, who was a leading member of the B'nai B'rith.
Jewish Masonry, right?
Right.
Yeah, Cohn is that's a whole nother story too. His life is incredible. Like, you want to talk about somebody who's like a Zvi Frankist character.
Yeah.
Wow, he's really, to just be friends like birds of a feather, to see Trump, that was his mentor, is just like, wow, your mentor.
Just to drop a nugget, you probably heard of Maury Terry, who wrote that book called Ultimate Evil. He points out that the son of Sam Killer was involved in orgiastic parties at Roy Cohn's house.
Wow. It makes perfect sense because all those process people were into that kind of
Correct.
stuff. Yeah.
And the process people connects to people like Robert Graves, who was the producer of Rosemary's Baby, which connects back to the Charles Manson, which connects.
Oh, see, I didn't know that.
Acceleration movement. Acceleration movement is basically the core of the far right today, which involves people like Peter Thiel, who's the shadow president of the United States, partner in PayPal mafia with Elon Musk, and so on and so forth. Which is why, I say that Americans are really not prepared to investigate why Elon Musk would be sporting a Nazi salute.
Right. This is so incredible. I'm actually doing a show on Roy Radin later on this month, so people keep an eye out.
There you go.
So
okay.
It ties into Graves and all these other characters.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't know that Berkowitz's orgies. I know that Berkowitz practiced Satanism pretty much all the way up until after his arrest, until the late 80s. So heavily involved. And that's
Graves was a friend of Cameron Kissinger.
I didn't know that either. I have to repost my shows on. Yeah, that's crazy because I've done 2 shows breaking down Rosemary's Baby and the Tesseract and all the secret society stuff that's in there.
Yeah,
like she was set up for the birth of the Antichrist or the birth of the New Age or whatever.
That's it.
That's what Rosemary is. That's
right.
So it's definitely occulted. Like people watch it just like it's a scary movie. No, this is something far darker and far more evil. That's super evil. And then you research like Polanski and all these other guys. It gets super dark. And Radin had these orgies and parties and druggings and all this stuff. All goes back. Mapplethorpe, all these guys. Really bad.
Yeah.
Really bad news characters. Dave, great to talk with you again. It's been too long. We're at the hour mark. I got a hard stop here in 10 minutes. And again, people, check out ordoabchao, all one word.ca. I will put a link in the show notes and also a link to David's new book about Zionism and then also his Patreon. So again, David Livingstone, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, stay there.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks. Stay there.